Hello, everybody, and welcome to our conversation in our series on seeking harmony. Today, we're going to be focusing on some topics that we believe are quite topical at the moment and have actually stood out to us in the news of the last week or so. And I feel like there's probably a level of golden thread throughout these topics. But I also believe that it will reveal itself more deeply as we progress in our conversation. So thank you for joining us. Thank you to the team for being here today. So I'd like to open it up to the team. There were some things that stood out for me. So I think the primary one was the Qatar Gate investigation involving the European Union Parliament, but also the treatment of the death penalty in the US and how it's kind of reduced in not only support, but in the actual follow through of applying the action, which just highlights to me that there may be a call for a different decision in this place. And so, another thing that also stood out was the US's Marriage Act, and then that being signed into law. So, of those topics, I'd like to just check in with the team, which one feels most fitting and most stand out to you, and let's allow the conversation to flow.
If it's okay, I think I would like to start talking with or about the issue with the death penalty and the use of executions in the United States. I think that's close to my heart. And so just seeing again in the news that there's issues around the use of the death penalty and basically, they don't buy the drugs or the drugs that they use for the lethal injection. I think the US buys it from like kind of sketchy places where you can't really, there's no like external review to just see the quality of it. So that's like a big issue, just the way they're executing people. So that's like led to issues around, people being injected, but then waiting like 3 to actually pass on, which, in my opinion, the fact you're going to die it can be very form of torture for a person, but then the fact that you're in agony for like 3 hours, and I'm pretty sure in the drug cocktail that is used, your body is frozen, so you can't react. Even if you're feeling pain, you can't like vocalize that pain. So there's been like Amnesty International for many years has just kind of been calling the US out on the use of the death penalty because it's a human rights violation. And so it's really odd to me. Overall, there seems to be a theme of either states abolishing it or just not using it, even if it is law. I think the article that I shared, there was 37 states that are in that category. So that means there's a minority of areas that use it, but they are the ones that are driving all the numbers that we see. And that's just kind of been a common theme. Like, I think 2% of counties in the United States are the ones that execute the most people. And like states like Texas, Oklahoma, it seems to be concentrated in the South because unfortunately it's a politicized issue. So I feel like the United States is kind of coming to this place specifically with the death penalty where there has to be like an overall choice made. And I think much of the country is kind of leaning towards the route of either not using it, saving it for very special cases, or abolishing it altogether. But it's interesting. I'm not quite sure what the lesson would be for the states that are using it. There seems to be something there for both sides, because it always is like a hot topic, and especially like for me, I'm a professor of criminology, and so I teach these topics, and just the resistance that I get from people, they get so angry when you just give them the facts, because the whole use of punishment, it has to have some sort of utility, but there's no evidence that the death penalty has any utility. It's really just like, someone woke up one day and they're like, oh, this seems like a good a good punishment, but it serves no deterrent effect. It doesn't do anything to actually address the problem of crime. And so yeah, I don't know how you all feel on, kind of what the core lesson here is. But I feel like some decision has to be made, because we've been struggling with this for years as a country, I think, of like whether or not it should be used at all.
So there's something quite interesting in what you shared and said. The article and the fact that there is a lot of resistance and tension. We lost you there for a second.
Yeah, sorry, my connection just cut out for a second.
Okay, you're all good right now.
You'll be fine now. It doesn't seem to have affected our live stream, but let's just see.
No, it seems good. Okay. Yeah, so there is something interesting in what you said, and the tension and the feelings of like, separation and like, like conflict in that subject that I felt in the article. But I think the article was really good in actually pointing us to the truth. Like, one might read it and say like, why are you complaining about like death penalty? Like it's her number of death penalties has decreased so much that it's like a record low right now. But it seems like there is a theme of like dropping it out or not going fully with it and not respecting the process. And I think there's a lot to do with like the choice to respect human life and our own divinity in the way that, in the sense that as humans, we have the right to a good death. Like, that's actually something that is very spiritual, having a good, peaceful death. And it's been clear throughout the years and centuries and decades that death penalty is not about that. Injection that seemed to be the response to the problem of like having a death penalty that is cruel, has shown times and times again that it's still not it, And so I feel like for me at the core, it's like this choice to respect human life and divinity. And I do feel like the article was pointing to something very precise, and that there was no separation there. Like, if you're seeing separation there, is that you're like, it feels like you're politicizing this more than it should be, and like kind of getting away from the truth. But that's how I see it. And obviously, like, I don't live in the United States, so I think other people might have like other points of view about that. So I'm curious to know like how everyone else's feel about that.
I think something that stands out for me, and it's something that Andrea was touching on was the utility of the death penalty. So what was the intent behind it in the first instance? And at the core of it, it feels like a very unforgiving process. So it feels like, and it probably goes back to a very rudimentary interpretation of a biblical concept of an eye for an eye. So I feel like at the core, it's very basic, it's very tribal in its execution and even probably slightly in its intent. And it doesn't feel as also what you've touched on, it doesn't feel as if it honors life in any reasonable sense. And I'm very cognizant that there could be and I'm very aware that there could be the argument that somebody who's taken a life deserves to have their life taken. But I feel like that absolute judge, jury, and executioner follow through on the concept feels almost archaic. It feels really old and it doesn't have a sense of having evolved in any reasonable way. And then we look at the mechanism through which they do it, and it feels like it's meant to impart maximum suffering to the person who has received a death sentence. And like when you mesh all of that together, at the core, and I think it's something that Sage spoke to Sage or Andrea spoke to in sharing the article in the first place, that there is a significant lack of love in the decision and in the decision to continue it. But it also feels to me like it's very much a tribal view that has not shifted, in the sense that it has not been modernized in any way. And at the core, it just feels like it's designed to inflict the maximum suffering, the maximum level of suffering, which then says to me intrinsically that there's a continuation of the lack of respect for human life. So again, back to Andrea's very early point in that it feels like there needs to be a new core choice on both sides that might see this becoming a more humane process. So that is my sense, but I feel like it's not rooted in anything even close to humanity or respecting human life.
I also feel like it's kind of like a manifestation of a bigger issue that is present within the American criminal justice system, because there's punitive punishments across the board. There's a lack of the lack of respect for human life across the board, and this illusion of separation that people who commit crime, which is also a social construction, are less than, they're not human. And so whether they sit in prison for the rest of their lives or they get executed, I feel like it's coming from the same disconnect. So even the states that don't use it, they're still doing other things that are, kind of disrespecting human life. And I guess to Sage, I know you unmuted yourself, so I'm gonna pass it to you because I feel like I've talked enough, and I can probably talk all day about this topic. but like what has to happen for the criminal justice system in this country overall to choose life or love and life, you know?
Yeah. Oh my God. What was my train of thought? Oh, Isaiah and I were talking about this last night, and a few things that we noticed and felt was that, well, first of all, like, I feel like the use of that lethal injection, I think it was intended to be a less brutal way. It's probably, but it hasn't really turned out that way often. Like, I don't know if in all cases, but it really hasn't. So I think that might underscore how there's a difference in intent in the people of the that are overseeing the criminal justice system. Because on one hand, like, you want it to be more, less brutal. But on the other hand, there might still be this feeling of like, we need to like exact vengeance upon someone, you know? And I think that's how people think God is like that. And they think God like punishes you, and God doesn't. And they misunderstand, you know, karma. Although, I mean, obviously in the US, it's not like based on the concept of karma, but yeah, but I think they misunderstand that. And it is true that like what you put out and what you do, like, you receive that too, because you're one and you're giving that to yourself too. But I don't know. I think like we were talking about how like there was, I think, a TFAS class, the Twin Flame Ascension School class. You know, I remember Jeff and Shaleia were talking about when the SEAL team, you know, 6 Navy SEALs like went and they assassinated Osama bin Laden. And he was like, obviously this huge like mastermind of terrorism. And they were saying like, you know, some people, like, you can tell them to stop or whatever, but they only understand, he said like some people only understand bullets because they're so closed off that they won't, that was the only way to put a boundary on him and say, you like, this isn't acceptable to us. And that's the only way for the world to uphold its boundary against psychopathy. And so like, I understand that. And it makes me wonder, are there any cases where that could be applicable with people? You know what I mean? But there's, with the death penalty in the US, like, there's so many cases of it being botched, or of it being like, people could be innocent and they might be executed anyway, or all these, it's really problematic. With Osama bin Laden, that wasn't a gray area. You know, he was clear in what he did and intended to do. So I don't know.
In a way, Osama bin Laden had a relationship with the world where he proved time and time again that there was no speaking with him and discussing, and actually the absence of relationship was a relationship, and so the appropriate response was a boundary. What I feel, and it's funny because like what I've always felt about the death penalty, even when I was young, was that there is a lack of relationship and knowing that person, whatever they might have done, in terms of like the criminal justice system, to have a penalty like that. It always felt like, obviously I'm not in the justice system, so I can't judge that, but it always felt like rushed, and not rushed because like people didn't take the time to judge that person and study cases, but I feel like the deeper level is having a relationship with him. And what it makes me think of is actually the New Earth episode of Jeff and Shaleia about prison, and the fact that prison was not about like being punitive, it was about like having kind of mental health system for everyone, and that wouldn't look that different from like incarceration, maybe or maybe not, but it's like the feeling that there's a way to even in prison, there's a way to ascend. It's not about punishing, and there's a way to get out of it and be healed, which is like what actually people want at the core, is like healing the system and society, but they don't know how to do that yet. And that's why we hear so many problems about incarceration and not having enough place for people and conditions of imprisonment and even death penalty. And I think the fact that what Sage pointed out about like that misunderstanding of God it makes so much sense now, because I was like, why would sovereign state, like Christian states and governors, allow that? And it's that I think that misleading interpretation of what God and relationships actually are. And yeah, just like thinking of that in terms of relationship, I think brings so much more depth and meaning to the topic than just basing this on like that tribal eye-to-eye interaction that Granville was talking about. And I feel that's what our society has been struggling with. It's like this incarceration system. Like, obviously, you want a secure country, so you want to have a criminal system, but you don't want it to be based on fear or upset or frustration or vengeance. And so although like there is a good basis about incarceration, there are things to heal too. Yeah, so that was my feeling on it, or feelings, I guess.
I think you guys are all touching on something quite important in the sense of the design of the system. And I'm not certain that the design of the system, one, was effective, and two, has received the necessary review that has been required. And, having spent a large amount of my life in the HR space, that sense that discipline needs to be corrective as opposed to punitive doesn't quite seem to fit into the system. And that might be the criminal justice system, that might be the system of most things in the world. I feel like a lot of it may have unintentionally been broken, but that's because it was unintentionally badly designed in the first place. And so when you speak to that there's an opportunity for ascension, even within the space of incarceration, it just feels like the system is not completely geared to do that and deliver that. And so some people will find it, because there is, at the end of the day, a sense of remorse that fuels the respect for life and wanting to improve. And then there's the flip side of the coin, that there's no real sense of remorse, and that you have repeat offenders. But I feel like, yes, it might be a strenuous requirement on any type of system to try to rehabilitate as much as they can, but I feel like that should be the primary purpose of the system. And I don't get the sense of that from the system. And yes, we're talking very much about the US system, but I feel like the South African system is very similar in that there are significant abuses of human rights within prison systems. There are significant, well, for lack of a better phrase, but there's a significant narrative around continued abuse amongst inmates. So, and I don't believe that the level of knowledge to kind of rehabilitate people and help them improve sits within the people who run the system and who are for corrective officers, policemen, all those people. They don't have the right level of skill in order to enable a system that should actually allow for correctivity or correctiveness and improvement. It feels like it kind of perpetuates the problem more than it solves the problem.
I feel like you touched on something very critical. Because I mean, that like initially, I feel like the intention was there, at least in the US, with the development of prisons, because I mean, the first prisons were created by the Quakers, that were like a religious group. So the thinking was that you put someone in a cell for 23 hours so they can talk to God and repent. And that's going to be, their saving grace. And then they'll be released and they'll be, contributing members of society. But somewhere along the development, that idea of like correcting and helping people repent kind of got lost. And you're absolutely right, Granville, in that I think it's a global issue everywhere, that systems of criminal justice, they just perpetuate the problem, because I feel like as humans, we have not fully understood that crime really comes from suffering. It comes from human suffering. And until like we can bear witness to that and, heal it within ourselves, I don't think anything's ever going to change, because all the laws we have around this behavior, it's all made up. It's some people got together somewhere and they wrote out a constitution and they put certain meanings and definitions behind behavior that for many people is just survival. I mean, so much of crime is based on economic need, or you're trying to cope with addiction or trauma. It's not the narrative that there's just bad people out there and, people are just waiting in a dark alleyway ready to like victimize you. I mean, that sort of like pathological behavior is very rare. Most of the time, it's people just adapting to a very bad social environment. And I think until us as humans can recognize that and understand that, because that's kind of where you see the humanity and that's where you're able to heal. But it's like this so punitive, like there's this idea that, this person is not human because they're going out and robbing. But really, they're doing that because there might not be any other option for them to feed their family or even, feed themselves.
It's interesting because we do see attempts to have like corrective systems within the system. Like how many times we've heard about stories about prisoners being given like divine missions and purpose and having to care for plants or animals or building their farm like inside the prison, and not just in the US, like in Europe too. But it still feels like abusive overall because these are like just little basically microcosm, like microsystems being experimented and not being generalized yet. But I do feel like there's a divinity in that, because like although most of the people don't have the skills to build a corrective system there, they're still like God pushing that forward, that desire to have that corrective system. And so there's still attempts. Where we are lacking, I feel, is that a lot of time when I feel with the system and like the Luciferian system, like basically the system we live in, which is like basically old Earth versus like the new Earth that we're trying to like bring forth with our healing and vibration. What I feel is that sometimes like doing like corrective things and trying to better things is just like scraping the surface and not healing at the core. So I think we need people that are good at like having that superficial level, but very needed level of organization covered, which is what has been built, I guess, in our system. We're paired with people that know how to heal the core and heal it in a way that benefits everyone, not like scraping everything and like going to ground zero, but like actually building something that is compassionate with everyone. And so I feel like because we're learning that, obviously we're still learning, otherwise like there already would be initiative to heal that system at the core. Well, we're still uncovering what is the core upset, and we're still uncovering how to heal it and how to be with God there, because I do feel that there is God there. In terms of like basically that humanity that you were speaking about, like not everyone is a killer waiting for you in the streets. Like lots of people also do like lesser degree crimes, I guess, and they have like traumas to heal, and basically they just need healing, just like everyone else, just in a different way, you know.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I feel like what you touched upon earlier, you and Sage Irene, was like the person's relationship with the world, or like I think that is so important. I feel like the actual just thing to do, like in the new, like a new earth way to do it, would be to determine, you know, what that is, and if that is unclear, then it's appropriate to get clear on what that is. But if it is clear, like that there's no that the relationship is only destructive, you know, then that's the choice that person is making, and a boundary needs to be set there. But if it's anything other than that, then we have to follow that relationship until it's revealed and clear on what is happening there, you know, and if that person is choosing to heal or not, you know. Yeah.
I feel like there's a very core element that's surfacing, and that is this, for me, it's the sense of that there is no real socialization amongst cultures around having an actual relationship with life. Because if you do have a reasonable, healthy relationship with life, it might mean that very early on you start to make very different core choices that may just obfuscate the circumstance of where you find yourself, but it would also alleviate that lack of respect for life that kind of feels to be at the core of a lot of what seems to be what drives criminal behavior. So I feel like it's literally that seed that needs to be planted earlier in life that says there's a healthy respect for life here. There's a healthy respect for my fellow man here. There's a healthy respect for what is meant to be happening within the system, within our relationships. And so if we have, it almost feels like if we have a healthy relationship with life, we cannot but relate to our brothers and sisters in a healthy way, which means we're also going to relate to ourselves in a much healthier way, which might just change every single possible decision that we can really make in this lifetime. Because a lot of it, as Andrea was sharing, is like people are responding to the circumstance. But the circumstance is literally on the outside of you. What's on the inside of you? What's at the core that really drives a healthy respect for yourself, a healthy respect for life, and the choice to live and to live healthy and well? And so I have a sense, I have a feeling that the relationship component has a much deeper root that actually needs to become healthier.
Feels pretty complete. Unless Sage wanted to say something. Yeah. What about going to the topic of Qatargate and the European Parliament? Well, it's called Qatargate, but we don't know if it's about Qatar at all. It's just that European representatives are very quick to nickname things. But basically, there has been an investigation ongoing for more than a year in Brussels, where the parliament is, about corruption with Middle Eastern countries. And in the apartment of the vice president, Eva Kaili, it was we discovered, police discovered 1.5 million in cash, basically. 1.5 million euros in cash. And so I think it's pretty surprising. I think the fact that it did a big splash at the beginning of last week was just the illustration that for most people, the European Parliament is about probably stability and transparency and upholding some types of example for the European Union and also the world. I think it's kind of shocking as a European to find that someone could make such bold ties with other countries in terms of corruption, and we're still uncovering how many countries were involved, who were the people that were involved, if it was country leaders or just representative, or it's complicated. But yeah, how do you guys feel about that?
I have a question.
Really? Yeah. Is it complicated?
It's It's simple, but at the same time, it feels like there's like several layers to it. I don't know.
I agree that there's lots of layers, but I like it kind of feels like the thread is coming through in terms of the respect for life and the respect for human.
Yeah,
And,
true.
you know, like a system that was intended to serve as an example of potentially a new political system. At the core, there's still components. There's components of corruption creeping in, which says to me that there's, once again, a lack of respect for things to work systematically and well, which says there's a lack of respect for life and humanity. But yeah, that's just my sense of it. But Isaiah, you were going to share something.
Okay, so from reading the article, so what is the corruption and bribery for? Like, what do they want? What is it about? I wasn't clear on that.
The thing is, we don't know.
We don't
about the
know.
money.
Oh,
but we
okay.
don't know what
I'm
was
like, what do they
there.
want?
We don't know. Federal police might know, but it's been like a case that has been ongoing for years, as they said, and they haven't even disclosed like the countries that were involved, which says to me that either there's an uncertainty there, or like they're trying to have more components to the story before actually revealing like everything. And I think that's where the layers come in, because like it's pretty big in and of itself, but like the relationship of like representative in the European Parliament with like Middle Eastern countries, it still boggles my mind. But yeah, it's we'll see what it's for, but we can try to guess. It's just like when we did with Biden, and like when he did a series of like several new laws, we talked about like what could be at the core of this. Like, is this publicity? Is this public image? Is this like true care for like US citizenship? Things like that. And so, well, yeah, we could probably play a game of like trying to guess what it's for. And it's probably about power. I think getting to the European Parliament, I think it should be a very humbling position. Same as being a leader of a country. But I think what is actually going on is that a lot of people feel this like oversized sense of power, or misplaced power, or trying to gain things from their position. And I think the core upset is there, is like trying to gain instead of giving, because being of service and actually serving a purpose is about giving and not about thinking of what you might gain or take, you know. So that might be it. It feels like the intent behind taking money in cash by the millions. But yeah, how do you guys feel about that? Isaiah, do you feel Isaiah wants to laugh?
Yeah, it definitely feels like greed, greed and power is behind it. And again, that just shows, that leads to like not considering humanity as well. So yeah, there's definitely a thread there.
What came up for me is I feel like there's almost like this with the name Qatar Gate. Like that was interesting to me because, as you mentioned, Yureen, the Middle Eastern countries that were involved haven't been named yet. So we don't really know if it was Qatar or not. But I feel like there was almost like this deflection or denial of responsibility from the EU, just based on that one choice to like call it Gotthardgate. Like, why not call it Eurogate? Like that would seem more appropriate, because it's clear that, you know, there's an issue with the EU. So I don't know. I feel like that also might be part of the which kind of, once again, kind of boils down to just respecting humanity. Because, you know, when you can't really like take responsibility for yourself and the repercussions for your actions, like you're not really respecting life in that way either.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that it was called Gate because, and when it's not known or it's not been released what country was involved, but I mean, it seems pretty like easy to guess, like it's because Qatar has caught a lot of controversy, obviously with how it like built everything for the World Cup and various other things, and even like how it got to host the World Cup. At first, when I saw the article's headline, I thought it was about like Qatar bribing like European people to like be able to host the World Cup in the first place, but I know that happened a decade ago. I thought you guys had mentioned something about that people think bribery might have been involved, or it was just about money. Maybe not bribery, but
because of the timing of everything, people think that it's linked to the World Cup when it's not. And
yeah,
you would think that it's linked in the way it's communicated, but yeah, it's not.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, I understand. I feel like, yeah, that's probably strategic and to deflect from the EU, like you were saying, Andia, and like, I feel like, yeah, I don't know. It's been mentioned that, like in some of what we were reading, like it was like saying it had to do with like these countries like wanting to influence European governments, and there was a phrase in there that said like Germany still plans on like relying on Qatar for gas, you know, like natural gas, and so it was implied that like, I think it's implied that there's like vulnerability there to influence because Europe was still depending on these other countries for energy resources. And that's just such a strong theme, what with Russia, like also trying to exert its influence. So I thought that was a big theme, like just turning toward yourself and turning inward and ultimately toward God, but just letting go of like being so attached to seeing others as your source and stuff, and especially not trying to like be in an abusive relationship or in a relationship with someone who is shady just to get something that you think you otherwise can't get. And so that's really important. And yeah, and then oh gosh, what else? This contact gate bribery thingy. I don't remember my other thought. Do you guys have it? Did it go to you?
I don't know, but when you were talking, I was thinking about colonialism and how actually some of the systems were built on like taking resources from the external, and a lot of it was transformed and even started with like exchanges that were like actually exchanges, like not extorting from countries. And sometimes it was extorting, but it still feels like a lot of the way to think for Europeans is you know, this external source of having something. And it's weird because it's like it's not, I don't know, maybe it's something to heal for I don't know if that's it, but I feel like there's a link there to like the system hasn't changed that much. Like we see patterns that are repeated through centuries, so why not that one?
Well, I think it takes a lot of like experience sometimes and contrast, and reckonings to really get clear for people on what they want and what they don't, because there's a feeling that you benefit maybe from that. You know, like there's some secondary benefit to this
There's
pattern.
definitely,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's like not healthy.
There is
So
definitely some secondary benefits. I think like otherwise, like France and Germany and other countries like that wouldn't even think twice. Wouldn't even think to do like so much business with like Saudi Arabia, for example, because like everyone knows it's shady. We've been like internationally warned that it's shady, but people still do shady business with it. So like the secondary benefits seems for many people greater than what is actually the truth. And yeah, maybe that's the pattern. Yeah.
yeah, I don't know why, and I don't know if this is accurate, but I feel like in Europe there's the feeling of like what they're moving through is this feeling of like not being able to like support themselves and like to be sustained or stand on their own feet in some of these countries. And I don't know why that is, but I've just had that feeling for a while. Like I've been feeling into them and like it feels like there's something going on there.
Wow. Wow, that would be huge because that would mean that a lot of the system would be upheaving, and we're talking about like one of the most like influential and powerful region of the world. And I think a lot of people are experiencing downsides and being in crisis that they want to ignore because it's like again, it's about power and like how they seem, but at the core, like, do we give ourselves the support and confidence to uphold that power all the time, or do we go into crisis and then we get back that power? And it's like it feels very unbalanced, is what I'm feeling.
My sense is that there's a big component of upheaval to it, but that upheaval is attached to, at the core, an ego death. And all this corruption is literally ego trying to take hold of power in a different way. So there's this grab onto something that's not real, but it has a real impact in financial and security and system terms. And so this ego death is trying to find the weaknesses in what has been called for in consciousness, which is greater stability, greater reform, greater movement in the direction of respecting life, respecting equal right. And that's how you see this dichotomy of the death penalty falling apart, corruption surfacing on two sides of the world in terms of the northern hemisphere in Europe and the southern hemisphere in the lower half of Africa. And then you have this thing where there's also the swing around of rights in terms of interracial marriage protection and same-sex marriage protection. It's kind of like this very much almost an internal battle of, I know what's good for me, but I'm also going to hold on to the back door of some of the things that I believe can secure me. So I think it's just this, it's literally that, almost that individual struggle of, I want to be good, but if I'm good, I have to give up so much. And so maybe I don't want to give up everything. And you kind of have this schizoid personality playing out on a global level.
It's interesting because Eva Kelly is Greek, and I see this in a lot of like leaders that that are in countries that have experienced a crisis or are still like unstable, like politically or financially, or have been in less than a decade or sometimes even a few decades. She's experienced a crisis in her country that was like big, massive, and the rest of the European Union was discussing for a month how to help Greece. And now she's vice president of, well, former vice president of the European Parliament. And it seems like there was this sense of like how, well, now I've made it, like I've secured this position. I can help my people in European Union and do better things. But there was also this sense of like, okay, I'm gonna store this cash for like rainy days. And not to explain her act, but it does feel like, I think one article was saying that, and I was like, wow, isn't that like kind of xenophobic? But actually, I think it was pointing at some truth that inner vibration, there's this thing of like, I'm gonna secure something and grab onto it, and because I'm scared that I would go into crisis again or something. So yeah, I felt it was interesting, an interesting parallel to what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't like understand, maybe you could quickly explain the relationship with like marriage acts, like you were talking.
So in essence, for me, it's the total opposite of what we were talking about in terms of the lack of respect for life and humanity. It's literally like these two very prominent sides of the coin that are literally battling each other for supremacy. So we have the side that's looking at not respecting life in terms of we need to be as punitive as possible, while on the other side we've got this serious respect for life where we're like, we want equality in as many ways and as many places as possible. And so we have this very powerful statement that says there is protection for same-sex marriage. It's not just that it's legal, it's actually protected. Same as interracial marriage, it's protected. It's like we've healed some significant things from an LGBTQIA plus community perspective and a Black Lives racial tension perspective. There's a significant respect for life there. And then you have this opposite side where there's like also a serious lack of respect for life. Then it's these two parts battling each other. And that's my sense. I just see a very unusual battle playing out in terms of the decisions are still they're still in flux. There's no complete balance here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, also, with that too, like with the Respect for Marriage Act, it has the word respect in it, but it's saying that like, it's only saying that other states have to respect someone's marriage. So like, if like in one state, like in California or Colorado or whatever, someone is married, then if they go to like another state that doesn't where you couldn't get married if you were that kind of couple, you're still legally married. They still have to give you all the rights and benefits and everything that comes with that. So it's also kind of like, it wasn't a law that says like, this is the law of the entire US, that interracial marriage and same-sex marriage has to be permitted. It was that other states have to respect the marriages of people made in other states. So it's kind of, I feel like it's kind of like a more peaceful, compassionate route to go because of the fact that a national law of that sort could be so inflammatory. And I don't know, it allows people to, vote with their feet, or vote with their wedding, I guess you could say, and go somewhere else where they can get married. And then, I don't know.
I do think that this is a topic worth definitely taking forward, but we have reached our hour today. So thank you to everybody for the conversation. Thank you to all of those that have viewed our conversation today. If you haven't already, please feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you'll find all our previous discussions that have happened in our Unionism Spiritual Discussion group on Facebook. And we look forward to seeing all of you soon. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.